Hi everyone, welcome back to another video. In this one we're going to be doing a 3D printed dice tower of Minas Tirith. One of my friends who's into D&D and some dice games wanted this, or asked for me to build this and paint this, so I did it. I ended up finding a file online and I printed it in Sunlu PLA Plus Gray, and here is the file that I used to print this. I will link this down in the description. And I printed this with a 0.4mm nozzle and a 0.16 layer height. And here are some reference images that I used for colors and things like that. The first one is from Weta Workshop's Minas Tirith model that they used, or that they recreate. And then the other one is just one that I found on the internet. I'm not exactly sure where that one came from. So to start out, I did prime it in black, and then came back with a somewhat of a zenithal, but I would say it was a heavy zenithal of a gray sear Citadel paint spray. And then to start out, because I wanted to make sure that I could see the details for the white parts to delineate from like the mountain tan parts. So what I came in with was a dark or bright warm gray from Monument Hobbies, and basically just dry brushed that onto all of the buildings and the walls and all of the towers and things like that, just to kind of, again, pick out those details so that I could see them to then start laying down more of the base colors. I think at this point too, I end up doing dark warm gray, and then I end up doing another one of bold titanium white from Monument Hobbies, just to get again that pop and really get an idea of what that white that I wanted to see was going to look like. Once I finished with the first dry brush of dark warm gray and bold titanium white, I came in with Xandri dust, a Citadel color, and started to basically block in or base coat all of the dark stone or the dark mountain parts. And I did this with kind of a, not really base coating, but I used a large dry brush, and I did a pretty heavy dry brush. I didn't necessarily want to lose all of the gray because I think it added to some of the depth of the color, but I do end up doing that and just trying to pick out all those areas. I wasn't trying to make sure that I got all of the very particular areas, because I knew I was going to come back with a smaller brush, and I'll pick out those details. And for those details, I mean, so there are some pieces within the city that have that dark brown or dark tan rock color, so I knew I was going to have to come back through with that. So this is really just to kind of get the first base color down, and then I can start kind of blocking in my colors, see where those colors were going to go, how they were going to look, and then I come back with a Ushapti bone, another Citadel paint, to dry brush over top of the Xandri dust, and that gives a really good tan or brown stone look that I was going for. After getting the Ushapti bone on, I then switched to green. I ended up doing a camo green base coat on all of the areas that I wanted the green, and then I came back in with a mixture of camo green and regular green. Both of those are Monument Hobby paints, just to kind of build up some of the highlight. And then what I did last was a final highlight of camo cloak, or mixture of camo cloak and bright yellow green from Monument Hobbies, and I think that gave a very nice kind of depth to the green colors. I wasn't too careful on how this applied as far as like how it hit the mountain part. I did make sure that I stayed away from getting it onto any of the white parts or the light gray parts, but I did not mind if this got onto any of the dark tan parts, because I ended up coming in, I think, with the second level or the second round of camo cloak and green mixture, and I just kind of put that in certain areas, again following the Weta Workshop reference to make sure that I was kind of matching that look to kind of look like there's some grassy areas up on those mountain parts. Next, I wanted to start picking out some of the details for the buildings so I can get those colors in there, see what it's going to look like. I ended up kind of nailing, I think, the paint mixture from the start. I used Faded Ultramarine and Jade from Monument Hobbies, and it's basically a one-to-one mix. I think there's a slightly more Faded Ultramarine in there, but you can kind of play with it on the palette as you're mixing it. But I basically came in with this as like my dark highlight or my base coat for all of the kind of domed houses and towers within the city. And again, this was following directly the references that I had earlier, in which you can kind of see here. But really, it's just a nice change in color or a nice pop of color in there that adds a lot to the piece. Then to finish off the base coats, I added in some dark umber from Monument Hobbies, just a kind of neutral, darker brown color that I'll then highlight up here in a second. But basically, I just highlighted up or base coated on the brown umber, and I just followed again those reference images and tried to pick out most of those details or most of the brown pieces or brown rooftops that were in the references. What it ended up kind of looking like is that most of the angled rooftops, and then all the domed ones were the green or the teal, and then all of the angled ones were the brown. Next, I did the highlighting for the brown rooftops. I ended up using light umber from Monument Hobbies and just tried to pick out some of the details on the edges, and then also ended up adding in some little dry brushing or layering on the flat parts just to kind of give it some texture look and give it some depth, so it wasn't just brown or flat brown sitting there. Then the next level of highlight for the blue domes, I basically just added more Faded Ultramarine to that mix that I had before and just kind of brightened it up a little bit, adding and then added that basically just to the tops, trying to keep kind of a gradient from lighter down to the bottom as more of a thin layering rather than like a spot highlight on top of those. So now I had a pretty good idea of what the end result was going to look like. So I came back through, started cleaning up some of the parts or some of the areas that I maybe overdid it on the dry brushing or on some of the highlights that I did. So I came back in with that Ushabti bone, just added a little bit extra highlights onto all of those darker tan areas, and that really helped kind of pop it out, and then I was a little bit more careful on where I was putting that, and covered up some of the green parts a little bit that I didn't really like or wanted to kind of blend in a little bit better. Ended up really liking how this step turned out. So this next step, I'm working on adding a little bit of depth. So I wanted to pick out a lot of like the window areas and some of the deeper recesses. And I ended up using a Nuln oil and tried to thin that out a little bit. And I think it adds a lot of depth to some of those very white, stark walls and buildings. It adds a little bit of depth in terms of like the deep shading parts. And then it accentuates some of the highlights that I did through the dry brushing. At this point, I could really just start cleaning up the model. I started with the Xandru dust and just went back through. And again, any areas that I either missed or didn't catch or caught with some of the white paint or the white dry brush, I ended up just kind of going back over those, redefining some of those lines so that it was nice and clear. And then I came back again with the Ushabti bone just to kind of brighten that up a little bit and did some spot highlights and some texture. Next, I blocked in the black on the base, or the little receptacle that the dice comes down onto, and then I could start painting in the gold once I had the black in there. I thought the black looked better than just the gray PLA that was in there. Obviously, I couldn't get the entire shoot for the dice, but I did do as much as I could. So I think when you're looking at the model, unless you're really looking for it, you're not going to see that gray PLA. Then for the gold, I just used rich gold from Monument Hobbies and really just layered that on nice and thick, making sure that I got it into those recesses of the lettering or the elven language that goes on the ring. And then I came back through with just a seraphim sepia wash or shade to go over top of that. And I think that made the gold look kind of a nice weathered look, and more than just like the bright base coated gold. And then I was basically done at this point. Just had to pick out some of the details and clean up some of the edges and the outlines. But overall, I'm super happy with how this turned out. I think the overall look is right with what I was looking for, and the level of detail is really good. I think you can still tell that this was FDM 3D printed. I probably could have gone with a smaller layer height, but I think this was a 23-hour print as it was, so I didn't really feel like it needed to be that much longer. And I think it turned out really well anyway. So I'm very happy with it, and hope that my friend likes it. Thanks for watching, guys. Please like and subscribe.